Thanks for all coming on this kind of summer day. So everything I know about how my family came to this country, I know from Ancestry.com. I learned on Ancestry.com that all 8 of my great-grandparents were all Eastern European immigrants. They all came here in the 1890s. They came from Russia, from Austria, and Poland. I know from census records that they all started out living in this very neighborhood. They lived on Cherry Street. They lived on Ludlow Street. The census records list their occupations as peddler and buttonhole maker, which is really an abstract profession. And they could not read English. And every decade, I would look at these census records. I would look at the census records from every decade, and I'd see how my family spread out to Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. In 1940, I found my father for the first time. He was 3 and living on 62nd Street in Maspeth, Queens. I found my parents' marriage certificate. They were married in 1969 in Manhattan. I hadn't even known that about my family. And the reason why I didn't know much about my family is not because I'm an orphan, but because when I was born, my parents decided to emigrate from New York City to a very exotic land themselves, New Jersey. And something, I don't know what happened when they were in that moving van, maybe in the middle of the Lincoln Tunnel, they decided to just leave everything behind, their family, their friends, their Jewish faith. And I'm actually going to pause for a minute on my family's story because that was in 1972. And in 1972, there was a different migration taking place that is pivotal to my story. And we'll just spin the globe for a little bit and land in West Africa, in Ghana. And there was a young man there in Ghana named Ohanaba Bowachi Ajay. He was the son of a deposed chieftain who was working as a farmer to support his family. So Ohanaba grew up modest means. And when he was 8, he was struck with a severe gastric illness, and he almost died. But a Ghanaian doctor who had trained in England came and saved his life. And this sparked a passion for him in Western medicine, and he dreamt of becoming a doctor one day himself. So in 1972, he was a high school graduate. He was 21. He flew to New York City. He ended up in Brooklyn with $21 in his pocket and got a job as a janitor at Brooklyn College. And 4 years later, he had a college degree. All right, pause on that story now and go back to the Lincoln Tunnel. When my parents emerged from that tunnel, they followed that old bit of real estate advice where you buy the crappiest house in the nicest town. And my parents couldn't afford much. My dad is a high school dropout, and he worked in a shoe store. My mom also didn't go to college. She was working as a secretary. And they bought a really modest home in a pretty nice town. But it was, I don't think they could have foreseen what an unfortunate move this would be for them. I think the not having community, not having family, not having faith, not having really friends, and then having all these financial pressures was really hard on them. And they divorced when I was very young, and my dad moved back to Brooklyn. My mom would later lose that house to foreclosure. And it was a hard place for me to grow up. When I was in elementary school, there was not one other Jewish child in my school. And there were not really many kids who were poor like we were or who had divorced parents. Nobody had my hair. And this ignited in me a fierce desire to just fit in. And that desire probably led me to make one of the worst decisions of my life. It started in 9th grade when my gym teacher called me into her office. Her name was Miss Romeo, which is a really unfortunate name for a high school gym teacher. And she asked me to shut the door and take off my shirt, and I did. And then she sat in a chair behind me, and she asked me to bend over and touch my toes. which I did. And she ran a cool, dry finger down my spine. And she said, "Has anyone ever told you that you have scoliosis?" And I said, "No." And, I didn't need one more thing. And then she said to me, "You should tell your mother to take you to see a specialist." And I just started crying because we were so poor at the time, and my mom was so stressed and overburdened that I had never even been to a dentist at this point in my life. And the thought of asking my mom to take me to see a spine specialist was a bit beyond the pale. And Miss Romeo handled my tears just so well. She let me cry. I didn't need to be fake placated with, "Oh, it'll be okay." I just wanted to cry, and she let me. And I didn't tell my mom. I didn't want to deal with this, so I just didn't tell my mom. But Miss Romeo was a great educator, and she gently kept after me. And by the end of 9th grade, she said, "If you don't speak to your mom about it, I'm going to have to." So I did. And to my mom's credit, she did take me to see a spine specialist. And his office was off the New Jersey Turnpike. It was in an industrial park. It didn't look like a doctor's office. And he brought me and my mom back into his exam room. And he said, "Okay, take off all your clothes." And I just kind of stood there waiting for them to leave, and they didn't leave. And so I took off all my clothes in front of them, and then he said, "No, take everything off." And then he had me stand against the wall with my arms like this, and he took pictures of me from behind while my mom watched. And I was 14 years old, and I was so humiliated. And then we went into his consultation room, and he put this picture up on a bulletin board, and it was of my ass. And he did this thing where he superimposed these 2 series of concentric circles over my ass, and he was using some kind of level to measure the slope. And he was talking, but I was like, "How can I listen to you when we're sitting here looking at a picture of my butt?" And I just wanted to leave. And finally he said, "Your curve is pretty severe. A brace may or may not help. It's really up to you." And I just wanted out of that room desperately. And I said, "No, I don't want to wear a brace." And that was it. We never went back, and we never saw another doctor. And I just continued to ignore my scoliosis for the next 20 years. I wore baggy clothes, I avoided mirrors, and I avoided my growing discomfort. And I just tried to ignore it until I was 33 years old, and I was running to catch a bus, and I couldn't catch my breath. And I couldn't breathe, and I didn't know what was happening. And I finally went to see my primary care physician. And she listened to my chest, and she had me take off my shirt. And when she saw my back, she said, "When was the last time you've gone to see a specialist?" And I said, "It's been a while." And so she wrote a name on a piece of paper. And that name was Dr. Ohanaba Bawachi Ajay, who, after he had graduated from Brooklyn College, he went on to Columbia University Medical School, graduated top in his class, had fellowships and awards and patents, and he was now the head of the scoliosis service at the Hospital for Special Surgery, and the guy to see if you had severe scoliosis. And I went to Dr. Bawachi Ajay's office, and I was so nervous, and I sat there in the waiting room with all these teenage girls and their mothers, and these girls didn't look scared. They looked bored. And a nurse showed me to an exam room, and when I got there, she said, "You could change into that robe, and there were a pair of gym shorts to put on underneath the robe. And when Dr. Boachia J walked into the room, he had this air about him where he was both regal and humble at the same time. And he turned on a switch to illuminate the x-ray I had just had taken. And when I saw my x-ray, I started to cry because I didn't realize how bad my spine had become. It was like a giant S. It was curved in 3 places, and the greatest curve was 70 degrees. And it was pressing up against one of my lungs, and that's why I was having trouble breathing. And Dr. Boachia J, he let me cry. He didn't try to rush my tears. He didn't try to brush them away. He just let me cry. And then he put a hand on my shoulder and he said, "I can fix you." And 2 weeks later, on November 2nd, 2004, the same day this country signed up for another 4 years of George W. Bush, Dr. Boachia J fused my spine with 2 titanium rods from T4 to L2, if you're into spines. And I stand before you here now, perfectly straight, pain-free. I can run a sub 10-minute mile. No, I can't. That was a lie. Maybe if I trained, but I could. Technically, I could. You know, there's a lot of talk about immigrants right now. And the country of Ghana is actually, as of February of this year, there is a visa ban against Ghana for ridiculous reasons, bullshit reasons. And Ghana is the fastest growing economy, not only in Africa, but in the world. And in 2015, 7% of their population sought to immigrate to our country, and we should be proud of that. And so I stand here, a really frustrated and angry American, and just someone who's been touched by an immigrant in ways that changed my life, in ways you can't even imagine. Thank you.